Our next speaker has a passion for everything he builds each day. Furniture, his family, the love of soccer, and his confidence in others. Jeremy French is the chief porter for Making Whole, a furniture making apprenticeship for men recovering from addiction. Making Whole is a business and art project, an experiment aimed at answering the question, can you create an environment where the natural outcome of those participating is a life, there's a typo here, is a life of flourishing. Started in 2018, these are the stories of how this project came to be and the lessons that have come from the journey. Please welcome the founder of Making Whole, Jeremy French.
We're going to have people pouring in here for a minute. Should we just have some small talk? I want to hear the biggest takeaway from Reggie's talk. A bunch of y'all were in Reggie's. Who's got something to say about that? What was it?
Take the next step.
Take the next step. Reggie is such a presence in this town. So Reggie and I were scheduled to meet one another, and then COVID hit. And there's two people in this town. Reggie's one of them, and Brian over at Haywood Street Congregation are two people that I had lunch appointments with, and then COVID happened. It's interesting. So this slide here, I've spent a lot of time this year thinking about the sort of striations in life, as if like from the lens of geology. You slice open, so when I die, they're going to slice me open. They're going to see all these stories, the geology of my life. And COVID is one of those, and it's interesting to run up against that, brush up against that now, of the opportunities missed that you forgot about, right? The things I was about to do right before it happened, and then life suddenly takes on an entirely different shape. And so many of the things we thought were important are no longer important. I was speaking with somebody last night who said her goal is to have a brick and mortar store. And I asked her the question, what's important about brick and mortar? And what you realize is that the reason why that's even a question now is because of COVID and how much that changed the shape of the entire geology of our lives. So one of the reasons I've been thinking about this is the other morning I walked outside and the temperature was the same temperature as the mornings when I went out to cook water on my stove after Helene. And it's one of these moments, and I knew this when Helene was happening, that this is going to be one of these things that lives in our bodies. And we forget that it's alive in there, and then something happens. You smell dirt that's soaked in diesel fuel, or you hear a thing, or you feel the breeze, or you smell propane and realize that's where my coffee's coming from this morning. And it's alive instantly. And the first time I really remember having this experience is that in Russia, they have cigarettes, and if you've ever smoked cigarettes in America, they all say Class A cigarettes. And you've never seen Class B cigarettes, and I don't guess they sell them in America. But that grading system exists because when you get down to Class C, what they've done is they've taken donkey shit, and they roll it up into a cigarette, and that smell is distinctive. And so I was in Russia the year after the wall came down, and everybody smoked these cigarettes. The 6-year-old kids, the 8-year-old ladies. And that's a smell that if I smell it right now, I will be in Russia the year after the wall came down, and there's bread lines and old ladies drinking vodka in an entirely different wilderness. So I've been thinking a lot about that striation of Helene, and that everybody in here has that. What the color of that is, what the shape of that is, how you were impacted. One of the things I noticed about the conversation with Helene in this town is that most people are bashful to say, yes, I had a story, and I'm included. The Swananoa River made it into our building. It's like it's never been wet in that building before. But I'm embarrassed to say that because I spent much of the next couple of weeks in places where they actually got flooded. Houston Trim's sitting right here. He came here. Houston Trim and I were dancing on the side of a mountain, pulling trees out of places. What I will tell you about my experience of Helene, and then there's this sort of competition of like, how shitty was your experience? What I will tell you about my experience is that what the color of that striation is going to be, is it's going to be painted about grace. It's about humanity, and it's about grace, and it's about this purity that I experienced when I drove through this town and saw people walking down the street with their partners, when I saw people coming together. That's what the color of that striation is for me. And I think it's one of the big misses in our conversation about this experience, is that something happened. I've yet to speak to somebody who doesn't when given the invitation, recall this as a profound moment where we got to see a snapshot of humanity that's rare. As I think about it, the thing that I long for the most is that I don't know I will experience that as a human being again. When everybody is brought to the same level. When politics don't matter, when finances don't matter, you basically are all the same. And so what a gift to be able to experience that firsthand, and what a miss when we kind of lean into the disaster of it all, right? We love a disaster. That's the thing that catches eyes the most. Like, you want to get somebody on Facebook, I'm sure there's some marketing plans out here, just get two people fighting in Waffle House. And I don't give a shit who passes over that.
Right.
That's where we're going to stop. But get somebody talking about how a hurricane that destroyed lives brought about humanity, and people don't stop at that. And that's the miss. That's the opportunity. I invite y'all, as we have a year anniversary of this disaster, to remember, but also to speak about the humanity when you're talking about people, particularly when you're talking with people, but particularly people who aren't from here. To invite them to realize that maybe our view of what we're aiming at is missing some really important points, right? So I've got all these different striations. I'm going to talk a little bit more about death and destruction, but right now I want to talk about financial collapse, right? And so as I look through the layers of my life that have kind of built this up, I love this image because there's one that crosses through them all. So I've got all these stories, but throughout this whole thing is my journey to discover what the fuck is it that I'm doing here? Why am I here? Really? What's the point of this? I kind of view this now as a stem kind of reaching up into the sky, eventually going to bloom, right? Eventually going to flourish. I don't know that I'll see that bloom, but I've got enough evidence that it's going to happen. I don't know that in my lifetime I fully see that. But when you cut me open, you're going to see that journey that goes through all these things. So somewhere in there is 2009. And I don't know how many of y'all were in business in 2009, but that was a moment that all the things that create geology, pressure, heat, like destruction, that's how I remember the financial collapse. It's in my bones. And when Helene was happening, I knew this is going to feel at some point. It's going to be as alive for me as that collapse was. And so when I'm looking back at that, there's a kind of scent in the air right now about what's happening in the world, that like maybe we're about to experience something similar to that again. And so one of my big lessons and my big takeaways from that is to just listen. So that's what I did not do well enough, is listen and pay attention. What I was in 08, 09 was scared, and I had my head in the sand, and I wasn't listening. And so at the beginning of this year, when I see things turmoil, I see the world that I'm relying on, which is architects, and I see their phones stop ringing, and I realize that means something for me 2 years from now, which is that there's not going to be the same number of houses being built. And so what I was unwilling to do as a younger person, a younger entrepreneur, is listen. And just ask myself, I was too scared to listen. And ask myself, well, what does that mean? It doesn't mean anything. It just means there's going to be less houses. That's not a reflection of what my experience is going to be. It's just a reflection of what the landscape's going to be. And the question is, how do I want to exist in that landscape? So what happened to me in 09 was it basically just, that experience disintegrated me, and I hung on by a thread and somehow survived, mostly because I'm very stubborn. And if we're truthful about why I'm an entrepreneur, it's because I'm the only guy dumb enough to hire me as the boss, right? So everybody says, I started my first business as a 19-year-old or something. It's because I was completely unemployable. That's the only reason I am an entrepreneur today, is that nobody in their right mind would hire me. So I started these businesses, and I'm just too stubborn to let go. And that's the only reason I survived. If I was a sensible man, I would have shifted to something else. The problem is I'm a high school dropout, I'm a drug addict, I don't have anything on paper that's of value to a company, right? So what do I do? And somewhere along 2011, where there's not much left of me, I'm pretty well dissolved, a company comes along and says, we want to buy you. And I think, you don't really understand how this works, right? Like, you buy value. I don't have any value. I got debt. So what you're saying is you're going to come buy my debt? Like, okay, twist my arm. You're going to hire me to do work for you? Sounds good. Twist my arm. So here I am as a high school dropout, being offered this opportunity to travel around the world and get paid very well to do that, to teach people how to do this really obscure thing that I learned how to do, which is to work with a specific type of concrete. On paper, it doesn't make sense. And if you ask me in early 2011, what does the next chapter of your life look like? If I'm sitting in here and Reggie says, dream big, like I can't dream of this. This doesn't make sense. And so I went to work for this company in 2011, traveled around the world, taught people how to work with concrete effectively. And the thing my boss told me that's like maybe the most important thing I've learned about business is I don't need you to go sell anything to anybody. I want you to go solve our customers' problems. And it sounds so simple. It seems like such a simple idea. Just go solve our customers' problems. So what I did in traveling around the world is I started paying attention to companies and who's successful and who's not. And so I happen to be working with artists who are this really unique group of people that in truth, they don't give a shit about their customers. What they care about is making the things that they love. They're passionate about what they do. I'm going to make this beautiful painting and you're going to love it. Don't you understand how amazing this thing I've created is? And I'm really hopeful that you see that and you love it. Artisans are not very good at thinking about what are the needs of the people who are going to buy things from you and how do I solve those needs. So I was paying attention. I went from everywhere from like guys that are running companies out of garages to Kohler. And I got to teach these people all up the spectrum. And what I found is that everybody that understood who their customer was and understood what their needs were, not just their needs as a business, but their needs as human, and showed up in response to those needs, their success is in direct proportion to how well they met those needs. And so I think to myself, this is what I want to carry into my next entrepreneurial stubborn effort, is maybe I need to consider the needs of my customers in ways that I haven't before. So in this journey, around about 2015, I'm probably getting into my 40s, I realized that my ambition is waning, that sort of stubbornness is waning, and this is a kind of there's a real ceiling in this opportunity for me. And I start being like, if I don't do something now, what am I going to do? And part of what that was driven by, one of the things I've learned about myself, is that I've got this animal in my head, and it's always hungry. And the thing that it likes to eat more than anything else is complicated problems. But if it doesn't have that, it just eats everything in sight. And so that's one of the things I know about myself as a professional. If the problems that I have to solve are not interesting and not going to generate new opportunities and generate outcomes for others, I eventually will consume myself. I won't be a happy human being. And so one of my jobs as a professional is to put myself in the way of complicated problems. And I didn't know what that meant. So one thing I do know is that I've buried a lot of my friends. And so around about 2015, I got this visitor. So this is out on my front porch. And this was the week after I just buried my brother-in-law. And he's the second guy that was an attendant at my wedding who killed himself. And so it was a really difficult morning for me. I woke up after spending a bunch of time cleaning the blood off the floor, putting the shit away, facilitating a funeral. Everybody here is sad. But I will tell you about all that. I said, that's like Khalid. What it does to be in the presence of death and destruction and loss is it tells you a story about what life is about. And I get to pick what this story is. This guy was a remarkable human being, and I can pick sadness, and that is absolutely alive in me. But I can also pick this other thing, which is maybe this is the mystery unfurling in front of me. Like a density that's going to show up in the geology. And what happens when I pay attention? And so I wake up in the morning, and I hear this chaos on my roof, and I go outside my front stoop, and this guy and I get to sit down together for a minute. Uh-oh. The video's not playing. You can hear the sound of it. It's unfortunate. You got any sense of what that is?
Everybody close your eyes.
Everybody picture me sitting. Oh, here we go. All right, let's see if we can try that again. Ian, you think you? All right, here we go. And this is about a half hour into me sitting next to this owl. And right at the time I think, this owl's fucked up. It leaves. And that's where I am. Perfect. Thank you, Ian. So we'll go back to the next, whenever you pull that up, I'll go to the next image here. And so I've been in Asheville long enough And I've been around a lot of crystal liquors. I've been around a lot of people that are convinced that this thing that's happened in their life is of an import that I don't believe to be true, right? And so I have this experience, I'm kind of sideways, and I think to myself, this is going to be my little secret. That was a nice little moment, but I'm not going to put any significance on this moment, right? And so later on that day, my wife says, hey, I'm going to pick the kids up from school. I didn't get this chance often because of where I was working. I wasn't home that often. And so our kids went on the south end, and Miles was in elementary school. And so we stop at the elementary school, and Leela walks across from one of the other schools. There's like too many schools over there. I can't keep track of their names. And she walks through the woods to come find us and get picked up. And so she walks through the woods, and this is how she shows up. Having told nobody this story about this owl that came and visited. My daughter shows up. Got an owl sticker on her third eye. Said, Leela, what the fuck? And this is true story. My kids somehow have heard the word fuck for a long time. What the fuck is this owl doing on your forehead? She's, I don't know, somebody just put it there. So this was an invitation for me to pay attention and to ask myself, what do I make of this experience I just had, and where does it fit in? And so one of the things I'm experiencing, and Stefan is still here, we were just talking about death. And this is another video. Let's see if we can play this video. These are all these friends. Ian, you got any ideas here? This is actually Carl singing in the background. This is Carl, who just passed away before the owl shot out. So you'll notice on the end of this wall, which are my friends that have passed away, is a blank tile. The day I was making this piece, which I find to be a very difficult piece, the guy who's making it with me says, I fucking hate this thing. I hate it. I said, I get it. I understand this is an important thing to me. How do we hold death? How do we hold people in death? And what I want to do is when you walk into this building, I want you to see the faces of people smiling and remember them in a different way. Right next to that blank tile was his best friend, and Mike, who helped me build that, was the next guy I knew to pass away. Having spent 9 months sober, in the best moment he had been in his life, relapsed, and 14 hours later he was dead, and he got added to that wall in spirit. I don't have the heart to continue to add people to that wall. So the question is, why do people get better? I'm tired of burying my friends. Why do people actually get better? What is it that people need? I heard somebody say something about neurodivergence in the last talk. I want to be neuroemergent. And where I resonate with that is that when we talk about addiction, we immediately associate it as a problem, right? And so when we got a problem, we just need to fix the problem. Maybe what addiction is just a really normal response to being alive. So what I experienced when I did drugs the first time is that I had a list of problems, and let's say that list of problems is 15 things long. Drugs fixed 14 of them. And I'm here to tell you the way drugs impacted you and the way drugs impacted me. If it didn't solve 14-year problems, you and I had a different experience. What I will also tell you is that if you ever come across something that immediately solves 14-year problems, your brain's going to do something with that information. Just like it doesn't have to think about when you put your hand on a hot stove to pull it away. It's going to remember, when I've got anyone on this list, we got a fucking solution. And it's amazing. The only problem it didn't solve is that y'all thought I was crazy. So what I need to do is I need a lot of y'all so you don't fuck around with my solution that I have for these 14 other problems. And just like every brain does, it takes this information when something works, good, bad, or indifferent, if it works, in order for us to conserve energy. Literally, this thing's like a battery up here. And our job is to go fill fuel into that battery. And so one of the things brains know is that we got to figure out a way to conserve that because there's not food enough for us to keep going, right? And so what the brain does is it puts these things that are solutions into an autonomous region that doesn't require as much energy. And so why is it baffling when a drug addict does drugs, right? So here I am, I'm 125 pounds underweight, and I'm going to jail. Why on earth did he do that? My life's like being destroyed. It's because my brain knows that's still the best solution. It's the best solution I have. So I see people like this, and the question is, why do people get better? So who do I know that's gotten better? And at this point, I've been sober a long time, and I start considering all the people that I know who've gotten better. And what's the common denominator? And there's two common denominators in those stories. Now, at some point, I invite all of y'all to pretend I'm not talking about addiction, and pretend like I'm talking about business, or pretend like I'm talking about being a parent, or pretend like I'm talking about any other venture in our lives. And what you'll discover is that the story is the same. So there's two parts of that story. One is that there's always a story about a person at the beginning. A mentor, a sponsor, whatever you want to call them, a coach. I guess we're in business here, let's call it a coach, right? There's always a story about a person that made an impact at the beginning. The other thing I noticed about all these people, men, women, young, old, is that all of them had either a profession or their principal hobby where they were required to solve complicated problems around a problem that they were passionate about. So what I call this is creativity. So I don't think of creativity as like pipe cleaners and cotton balls and fucking shit that makes us happy that turns into an outcome that we hang on the wall that we love and everybody else thinks is trivial, right? That's not how I think of creativity. I think of creativity as basically the scientific process. The principal difference between science and creativity is that we're not required to have proof. So what it invites is it invites intuition to engage in the journey of discovering answers to questions. So without exception, all these people are taking these complicated problems for which there's uncertainty, and they're finding solutions to that. And so whether that's one of the principal areas I saw people were active mothers, not just somebody that had gone through the process of birth and then gotten busy going to whatever, to do work or whatever and hope these kids don't, but people that were curious, active in being mothers. Those people have the most complicated problems. I saw creatives, I saw entrepreneurs. Every one of these people had taken this exercise of solving complicated problems and applied that back into their recovery experience, right? So what happens is recovery becomes authentic. It becomes something for which we've got a connection. And what that does, that journey invites flourishing. That's it. And so the question is this still on? It is? I sneakily turned it off.
I think so.
Oh, sweet.
There you go.
Nice. So my question is, can we create an environment? There's this big mystery around addiction. If you get down to the stats of how many people get better, it's actually, the numbers are kind of like shocking, if we're honest with ourselves. Why are they shocking? Because what are we measuring? We don't know. So in the world of medicine, what we've done where we're really effective at medicine is when we have something that's centralized, that we can see and we can measure. Give science a tumor, and they will find a solution to it because they can see, and they can measure it, and they can follow it. Give science electricity and emotions and mythology, and they're lost. How do we know what to do with this? So where we've taken addiction and we've made it this medical thing, what it really is this decentralized phenomenon that affects every area of our life, and we don't know what we're looking at, and we don't know how to measure it. So how do we even come up with data that's reflective? So we've got this idea that addiction's about medicine. And so we build models around that, but then one of the big things we don't have is any way to point at whether the work we're doing is effective or not. And the only manner we have to do that is to ask the question, are you still sober? And it turns out if you really ask that question among treatment, that the rates of recovery are either doctored or they're 10%. And they fall into these numbers where it's like that person was probably getting better no matter where they went. So how do you actually help people? Can you actually help people? That's another question. You've all run up against this. Can you help people? You know, everybody's come up into somebody in their life that you realize like this person doesn't want to get better. Is there anything to be done? And so my big question is, can you create a place where the natural outcome, if you land here, you're going to come out the other side of this, and the natural byproduct of that is you're going to flourish, right? So let's see if I can remember how these slides go. So what is flourishing? I think hopefully the next slide. So anytime we come up against the word, my favorite one is God. I think it's the most ineffective word in the English language. Not because of my feelings about God, but because if we did this survey right now and asked everybody in this room to define God, we're going to get however many people there are here, we're going to get that many different answers. It doesn't mean anything, right? And so one of the things I learned about myself, this was when I thought about the word compassion. Do I know what that means? And I'll tell you about every word that I think of is attached to a person and a story, right? And so compassion is my grandmother in this weird little, like real kind of knitted thing with balls, like a blanket, and tissues. And that's what I think of when I think of the word compassion. And I'm pretty sure that's not the definition of compassion, right? The first place I like to go is, where does this word come from? Before people got a hold of it and dictionaries got into the business, where did this actually come from? What were we trying to drive at, right? And so I did that with compassion, and compassion is a real simple word. It's calm, which means with, and passion, which means to suffer. And suddenly this idea of my grandmother and tissues and this horrible knitted thing is a totally different idea than the idea of suffering with somebody. My idea of helping somebody, if what I'm doing is suffering with them, it kind of changes the context of what the directive and what the invitation is and what it is I'm driving at. So I like to go to Latin first. And flourish is kind of an easy word. It sounds like flower, right? And so that's kind of what we're driving at. Flower, you can read this if you want to. I'm not going to read it. That's the worst thing about PowerPoints is when somebody turns around and reads the shit that you're perfectly capable of reading faster than I am. The French got a hold of it, added a lot more letters as they tend to do. And this is, thanks. Sweet, it's not my fault. This is the definition. One of the definitions I found. This is the one I like the most. To grow or develop in a healthy and vigorous way. We should probably go find that definition. I'm going to ask a favor for somebody to pull out their phone and find the source of the word vigorous. I don't know what that is. Somebody going to do that for me? Especially as a result of a particularly favorable environment. And this is an interesting idea. What is a favorable environment? So I'm going to take this moment while Ian's helping me out. Somebody's looking up the source of the word vigorous, and somebody else is going to tell me what is a favorable environment. Let's get some volunteers here. What does that mean?
Vigorous.
Yeah, let's hear
Start
it.
there. Okay.
Alyssa's friggin' on point here.
Middle English derives from Old French vigor, meaning strength, force, and ultimately from the Latin word vigor, meaning liveliness and activity.
All right. All right, so what does favorable mean? What's a favorable environment? Who's going to take a stab at that? Loving, that's one. A loving environment is favorable. So y'all just talk out. I'm not like Reggie. I'm not going to call him.
An environment that supplies everything that they need to survive.
Okay.
Food, whatever the object is, whatever it needs to survive.
All right.
Food, water, light.
Easy? Somebody said easy. All right.
An environment that helps people flourish.
All right. Somebody's fucking reading the Cliff Notes. ChatGPT helped him on his last exam, y'all. Let's guess it.
Desirable.
Desirable.
Conducive to good outcomes.
Conducive to good outcomes.
There's something about sharing, because you're
Sharing.
giving a favor.
Giving a favor, all right. I like that. What? Supportive. You know, I asked this question, and it was kind of a different question to Facebook the other day. Basically, what is a good life? And you know what nobody said anything about, and the same here, is about pain. So I'm curious, if we were to go back to that image of the strata, this thing that paints the story of our life, how many of those stories are not without pain? So how many of y'all, everybody here, Zell and Maureen, are going to crush it later. I'm going to tell a part of their story, and I think I know them well enough to tell that. Maureen's had 5 strokes since Helene. Is that right?
Yeah.
I saw Zell last night, and there is a life in Zell's eyes that I didn't see the last time. There's something distilled and potent and real in Zell that is as real as it gets. So I've got a question for all y'all. Have you ever experienced life where there's not a deep challenge, a deep engagement to a problem? Does it exist? But yet our definition of this, what is favorable, you know? So we anybody my age, came from a mythology that was adapted by our parents, that the job is to take away struggle. And it's turned us into kind of like, frankly, kind of soft, whiny little people, right? Their parents were like, dude, like, I've got a can of beans and a room for the 6 of you. Y'all do the best you can because I'm going to war, right? Different type of resilience comes from that. I'm not suggesting that, like, that's what we should do, or I'm not suggesting that we're not on our way to that. But maybe our story's a little bit convoluted, right? So here's the question. Can you create an environment that generates flourishing as a natural outcome? And then the next question is, what is flourishing? And what is it that you create in an environment so that people can flourish? So the purpose of business is for human flourishing. We make it about money, really. You know, if you asked everybody here, like, what's the most important part about business? They'd say money. But what is money? Money is nothing more than stored options. So what are we going to do with those? The goal in using those stored options is to generate flourishing. My question to all of y'all, we're in this curious moment in life where the options are like on a hill, right? A bunch of people are getting a bunch of them, and a bunch of other people aren't getting a bunch of them. And we've got this collective mythology that you get to do whatever the fuck you want with your options, right? Don't worry about the rest of them. So one of my invitations to y'all is to consider, what do you want to do with those options? The other thing we can do, and the beauty of business as a tool, is that we don't even need those stored options. We don't even need the money to generate an opportunity for flourishing. So what we've done, I basically am going to put people in an environment where they're challenged, where they suffer, and where they learn that they're okay, right? And so my best way to do that is to put people into complicated problems. And the way I know how to do that best, the language I speak, is around building things, right? And so not building like, we're not like paint by number birdhouse kind of shit, right? I want to take something that I've never done before that makes me uncomfortable. And I'm going to let somebody stand beside me and figure out how I fail and how I suffer and how I get through to the other side and how I don't fucking die in the process. That's it. That's the invitation, right? So we had this, that's effectively all we do. We build furniture, it's nice furniture, it's complicated furniture. It's also stuff that gets attached to houses, which is good. Because you don't have to pay sales tax, if it's been screwed to the house as opposed to furniture. So sometimes we attach things to the house, you don't have to pay sales tax. Great news. That's all we do. We build things. That's all the place is. Recovery program for drug addicts. And we just make stuff, right? What we also do is we eat together every day. I started thinking about, well, thinking back to Helene, one of the things it does is it makes you wonder, like, what's important? Eating. Eating's kind of important. Kind of like if you talk about, hey, y'all went on vacation, what did you do? What did you do with your family? Tell me about your story of being on vacation. Nobody's going to tell a story that doesn't include food. Yeah. So let's just eat together. What happens when you take a kid and you give them a credit card? You say, go cook for us. I think the next slide actually does this. I was saving this for later. Maybe here we go. This kid has never been with a woman. And he shows up and he thinks he's dumb. He's really, and the beauty of thinking you're dumb is it gets you off the hook to have to do anything hard, right? Because you're just dumb. Just stupid, right? So he got given a credit card, sent to the grocery store, and now cook for everybody. Well, how many is it going to be? Well, I don't know, because we have this open invitation to lunch. Any one of y'all can show up to my shop any weekday and eat with us. So we literally have no idea who's coming. We've literally never run out of food. There's always enough food. We have no idea who's coming. So go cook. Well, what am I supposed to cook? I don't know. Cook whatever you like to eat, right? So he cooked. Got a girlfriend, and this was the message I got from him on Friday. He's real proud of himself. This is like somewhere between like really benign and maybe one of the most profound things you can get from somebody, right? And so as I'm considering how does building furniture and eating and hanging out with people, getting dirty, suffering a little bit, what does that lead to? How do I measure success, right? And so if I have somebody for a year, and I think that the question of whether or not somebody's sober is an invalid question, because it tells you that the problem is this very specific thing, and it doesn't give you a sense of the solution. So what am I going to do with somebody in a year? What I want to do is I want to equip them with the kind of tools they need to go be successful for the problems they're going to face that I have no idea what those look like, right? I need to equip you to be basically a creative problem solver. That's all life really is. And so how do I do that? One of the best ways I can judge whether somebody's getting better or not is by the quality of their questions. So are you asking better questions today than when you showed up here? And if you are, I've got a sense that what that means is you're going to go into the world and you're going to ask a different set of questions about who am I, about what is this person. This is a guy who's pretty young, pretty inexperienced in life, and amongst other men, and whether you say it out loud or not, a kid in his 20s who's a virgin is going to feel a thing being around other men, right? And so there's this inclination about these men where they need to perform, and in that performance is lost being aware of somebody else's needs. And so there's a little bit of performance like, hey, look, I just made jambalaya for you. Doesn't that make me a fucking hero? There's this other thing of how can I contribute to this relationship? And so the fact that this guy who just wants to be dumb, who just wants to hide out, is now making jambalaya for a girlfriend. The other part of this story, he's like degenerate, doesn't want to go to school, is in med school now. And so when people hear about making whole, they think, oh, that's great. It's like a job reclamation thing. It's like, I could not think of a worse job to offer somebody than the ability to go be a craftsperson in this environment. That's a terrible job to do. What I hope for you is that whatever it is you're going to flourish into, I hope to give you the tools so that you can become that. And so how do you take somebody that's a dropout and you put them in a situation where they're seriously saying, I'm going to go to medical school? What are the questions you need to ask of that person? And what questions do they need to ask of their life? And so part of the way I measure the quality of what we're doing, where we're basically putting people in a difficult environment, feeding them with complicated problems, and then showing them that A, they don't die, and B, oh, I can actually cook. Oh, I can actually read a tape measure. I didn't know I could do that. Oh, I can actually show up for somebody when they're suffering and ask a question of them. Oh, I can show up on a team and participate in a team, not need to be the center of that team, but actually be a contributor on that team. Like, this isn't me being broken. This is me not having the tools to exist in life. This is the proof that works for me. So we've had 50-something guys enroll in our program at one time or the other. Some of those guys stayed for a week. Of those 50-something guys, 33 of them have stuck it out. And sticking it out, there's not like a point where you get I'm not giving out certificates. I'm not giving out like prizes. Basically, like you still have to show up here until you're ready to ask the right question. So these 33 men, 30 of those men are self-described as existing well in the world. So that's a precedent that doesn't exist in the world of addiction. I'm not saying that to boost my horn. I'm saying that because we're asking the wrong questions. So we're asking the wrong questions collectively. Where does that come from? We're carrying around the wrong story of what the point is. What's the point? And that's true in the way we talk about God, in the way we talk about politics, in the way we talk about family, and in the way we talk about business. We are byproducts of a mythology where more is better, where I am the most important thing to look after. There's this ideology that came after the wars in the 50s where it's basically like, we won, now y'all go flourish. And the way that was interpreted is like, go get your own now. We're not under stress, we're not under threat, go. And what that is bastardized into now is that you take care of you, I'll take care of me. And let's just hope we don't step on each other's toes. But if we do, the best thing to do is to argue. It's to fight. It's to take the other person and diminish them into the smallest possible object they can be. And that's where we exist now. We all exist here. This is not unique to me. This is not unique to Asheville. This is not unique to a certain political stance. We're carrying around a mythology. So one of the things you will see about addiction is if you go to Europe or you go to other countries and you start talking about addiction as if it's an epidemic, what you find out real quickly is that it's a pandemic. So what are the conditions here that create this situation? A lot of people love to point at Sackler. And that's a fascinating story. If you consider the patriarch of Sackler was the first guy to think, hey, you know what I need to do? I need to market drugs. And so any of y'all who are my age, whose mother was hooked on Valium, in the 80s. What you go back and you track that back and you find this beautiful ad campaign, Mommy's Little Helper, value. And that comes from the guy that goes on, his family goes on to create OxyContin and create this thing. And it's a beautiful story. It plays well in Hollywood. We've got a villain, right? Sackler's the problem. This has got fuck all to do with Sackler. This is about the story we collectively have adopted as a culture. More is better, and then I'm on my own to collect whatever I can get. So my invitation to all y'all is like, what can I do to actually contribute? So my experience in Hawaii, and this is what I'll end with, I had this profound sense that my job is just to go help, and it felt good. Houston's one of these people. Houston went out and helped. Houston calls me up and says, I got a track hoe. Let me know what I can do for you. Like, that's a call you don't get every day, right? And so I said, well, shit, track hoes are kind of cool. We want to go dig some stuff up. We're trying to help people. Yeah, come on. And Houston shows up. And we get stuck in, and there's this moment where there's this quality when people see you do that and they say, oh, you're so good, you're so wonderful. I'm having a good time. Like, I'm having a good time seeing people's lives transform because I'm showing up. And like the juice that I get, this is like, what I will say is it's hard to equate this with altruism, right? Like, I'm not like washing dirty people's feet, y'all. Like, I'm not Mother Teresa here. Like, I'm having fun. I get to ride on his track hub and pull trees out, and like insurance is like kind of like OSHA's not around. Let me just tell you, OSHA was not around when Houston and I are swinging off trees with chainsaws, and that, like, I'll be honest with you, I kind of like that. I kind of enjoy that, right? I was provided this opportunity because the question I have is, how can I be of service? That's the question I have. My question to you is, how does the question that you're interfacing with change today? With how can I be of service? How can I meet somebody else's need? And that's true whether we're talking about God, or we're talking about family, or we're talking about business, or we're talking about love, or we're just talking about ourselves. How does this change? How does this change the shape of things? And what happens when we start asking that question collectively to the people around us? How do they show up? No longer as a broken human being, but as somebody is being asked, what can I do for you? How can I serve you right now? So I have no concept of the time. I'm probably late. Anybody have a sense? Beth, where am I at?
11:52. Yeah, it's up overtime. 5 minutes over.
Overtime. Let's go. The last thing I want to do, and then I'm going to open it up to any questions people are curious about. This doesn't happen without that woman right there.
You have 10 more minutes.
Oh, I got 10 more minutes, so Beth, brace yourself. This is the gift. I promise you, Charlotte, North Carolina is not experiencing what y'all are experiencing right here, right now. And that doesn't exist without Beth. And it's been a pleasure to watch Beth put this on and lean into her discomfort and lean into her talent of connecting people and being curious and putting something fresh out for the world, right? And these things don't happen without people taking that risk. So, like, that was a weak ass clap. Please. Thank you. All right, I'm going to open it up to questions because I got nothing else. Let's actually see. Do you have anything else? Yeah, that's it.
How do people find you?
That's a great question. They don't particularly well. And that brings me to another thing. So I knew this like formula. Just solve the needs of your customers and you're not going to walk. And so where this concept came from, the studio that I ran before, every year somebody comes to me and says, working in your shops would change my life. So there's a man that shows up to me, no teeth, like a jacked up Jeep with like crazy like logos and shit on it, and like pretty degenerate guy, right? Some people might call him a redneck. Not having teeth definitely contributed to that sort of assessment. Shows up to me years later with a PhD and says, working in your shops will change my life. So I knew that there's something in this environment. There's something among men. One of the other things I discovered is that some of my most intimate connections are with men that I work with. And as I start to like unpack that, what I realize is that there's this moment where things are really difficult, that when you don't leave, I feel safe. And it turns out that's something packed into the intimate world, right? So I knew there's something in this. And so when I started this business, I think people are going to show up here and get better, and in fact they are. And so it's also a beautiful space. Everybody's welcome to come check it out anytime you want. And so people would walk into this space, people that refer others on where to go for treatment, walk into this space and say, this is amazing. I love this. I wish this had been around when I got so, right? And then crickets. Nobody calls me. And I think, wow, like this is weird. One of the things I will say, and I've got to be careful, this is great because this is not an addiction treatment industry business right here, so I can say this out loud. The addiction treatment industry is one of the nastiest things on the fucking planet. It's disgusting. So I think maybe I'm just in a broken place, but I think more likely what's happened is I've either got my customer or their needs wrong. That's the only explanation for why people aren't showing up, right? And so I got both of them wrong. My customer is not the apprentice that's showing up into the building to be seen. It's the person that refers them there and pays the bill. So I got that part wrong. And I got their needs wrong. And one of the reasons why I got their needs wrong is we have this collective understanding that people don't get better from addiction treatment. So if you're going into this, that's not actually a metric that you're reading, right? And so I shared this on the podcast. I find it to be fascinating. It's an interesting thing. When I got into this business, I did a very extensive business plan. And one of the things I discovered is that every word in the English language has a value, a dollar amount on Google. Google values every word. And it's a simple algorithm. You know, how many people search this and how like competitive is the marketplace for that word. In the top 10 most expensive words in the language, 6 of them are related to addiction treatment. So most things, if you're a pay-per-click kind of person, John back here John's actually a great pay-per-click guy. He'll need Google support. He's the guy. Hand raised. We're talking like 20 cents a click, right? Expensive words are a couple of bucks. We're talking about words that were in the $50 or $60 a click region. And when you start to unpack that layer a little bit deeper, what you realize is that everybody that's showing up into this marketplace is completely uninformed consumer that's hurting. And so it creates this interesting phenomenon where that customer, I'm hurting, and I don't know what the fuck I'm looking at, but I'm scared. It's actually not difficult to market to, right? Let me show you equine therapy yoga in Malibu at a beautiful house. and like 6 stock photos of like different colored faces smiling, and that's what I'm gonna sell you, like, darn, right? I'll take it. So that's what I'm up against. And what I realize is I still don't entirely know who my customer is and what their problem is. And part of the reason why I don't know what their problem is that there's not been a solution that's hit, that's like rippled out and shown everybody else, revealed to everybody else what the solution to that problem is. I know that most of the problems are that people are in pain. And one of the difficulties is I'm actually telling you, come here so you can suffer. It's not a particularly good value proposition from a marketing standpoint. It turns out telling the truth in a space where people are hurting is a profoundly difficult thing to do. So people find out about us typically because they know me. And that's a real ceiling on my business that when I've got my business hat on, I struggle to find answers to. And so as a business owner, like, you probably shouldn't take any of my advice on a lot of things because I'm not particularly interested in money, and I am not particularly graceful when it comes to, if I believe in a truth, not saying it. Good question, thanks.
I'm curious how you think about the balance of like when you put up that question about a favorable environment. I'm a former teacher, so my like first instinct is zone of proximal development. Like, it needs to be challenging enough that you can grow, but not so challenging that you shut down. And so I'm curious to know how you think about that when you talk about like suffering together and creating this environment.
I think the apex where the balance happens is entirely about safety.
Yeah.
So this is a question of safety, and the question is, what does that mean, right? What does it mean to be safe? And so I think that's where the balance is struck, is understanding what it means to be safe, and that's something very different for everybody, right? And so I think one of the things that, as a business owner, I don't have a scalable business. Intimacy is not scalable. We can pretend like intimacy is scalable, but intimacy is about being connected, and connection is not really scalable, if we're honest, right? I want to know who you are. Compassion. I want to suffer with you. Well, I can't suffer with you if I don't take the time to know you, right? And so where I spend my day is trying to understand how can I push in one direction or the other. What I tell parents is that there's two things that are going to be true of your son. Is that I'm going to force them to fail, and I'm going to give them opportunities to succeed, basically. And which one you're going to experience kind of depends on where I experience you in creating that balance, right? And so one of the things I want to do is I want to take you into as much pain as possible where you never give up because you feel like you're going to die, right? My job is to ensure that you know that you're not going to die, right? And how do I do that with any given person, right? How do I put somebody in an uncomfortable situation? I think a good example, and this is tricky around education and around teaching people, is that I hate heights. I really don't like heights. I will crush an outward bound course. You put me on a ropes course. If there's something hooked to me, I'm like, these motherfuckers pay too much for insurance to let me die. I'm not scared, right? Same environment. And so this is part of the balancing act and one of the questions for me is, how do you make something real? How do you make threat real and create safety at the same time? And I don't know that I have a way to package that response. I think the thing that I do know is that I will always have the resources I need if I'm asking the right questions. And that's my philosophy in walking through business. If I'm engaging the right question, if I find myself pushing against a brick wall often, it's probably because I'm asking the wrong question. What I experience is that when I'm tuned in, when I'm listening, I don't run up against brick walls. Everything I need is there. And so this is a curious moment. Like maybe me flourishing is trusting that I've got everything I need. Everything I need is around me. And I just have to not get scared. Basically don't flinch and trust the journey. And so in that, I find that there's an intuition. I think, if we're going to talk about education, I think teachers are the most intuitive bunch out there. And I think the big issue with education is that we don't trust that.
Yeah.
I was going to ask, what are some of your favorite questions that you go to when someone new comes to the shop?
I don't know that there's a script for it. My favorite questions are like, who are you? Who are you? Who do you think you are? How's that the truth about who you are? I think my favorite question is why. I think when we start talking about difficult things, why? So we've got one promise. Everybody in this room is going to be dead. No other promises. I guess the only other promise is that you're going to feel pain. So there's two things you're guaranteed now. Pain and death. Now, if you examine why things suck at any given moment, and you get right down to the core instinct of being a human being, you will discover that the reason it sucks is because you're afraid to feel pain and you don't want to die. And it seems kind of fruitless, right? To spend my whole life trying to avoid the inevitable. So I have one book that's sanctioned in my shop. It's called There's a Monster at the End of This Book by Grover. Right? And so I've been doing this thing where I film people reading this, and it's fucking amazing, absolutely amazing. For those of you that don't know the book, Grover is terrified of the monster that he's been told is at the end of this book. And so you're reading this book, and all Grover's doing is trying to build contraptions to prevent you from getting to the end of the book, because that is where you will in fact find a monster. And we get to the end of the book, and who's the monster? It's Grover. Lovable, furry Grover. I think it's maybe the most profound story is I'm considering why am I suffering. So the other thing is I think there's two different qualities of suffering. I think when we show up to death, we will bring a bucket of a known quantity of suffering that we will have collected along the way. And the only question I have today is what do I want to put in that bucket? Do I want to put poor me shit in that bucket? One of the things I discover about compassion is that I have the option to suffer with you. I have the option when the floods show up to arrive at your shop and go through the mud and pull your tools out and try to salvage it. Like, that's what I want in my bucket. I want that kind of suffering in my bucket, not the kind where I'm like, poor me, I don't have enough, right? And so my questions are revolving around what are my ideas about what is it I'm trying to avoid? And is that really like avoidable, first of all, and worth trying to avoid? Yeah, I'm out of time.
Transition.
Transitional time. Thank you all so much.